So lovely to see the sun, and I do understand that's rare. And I love Cleveland, and you guys have just been so great. I feel so fortunate. Sometimes I just fly in and I don't get to talk and hang out with people. And I've got to meet so many of you, and I'm just so impressed by this chapter. I'm probably not supposed to say this, but I think you guys are like the best Alzheimer's gathering that I've been to. Really. Just warm and wonderful. They can't be here right now, but I really want to thank Brian and Christina Richardson for their hospitality, for a lovely gathering last night. And I got to get to know and talk with some of you, and a lot of the shared stories, good stories and bad stories that we share. So many caregivers. And Donna Fallon, again, can we have a hand again for Donna Fallon for starting the Daughters Club, which is why I got to be here today. To Marcia Spitz, the co-chair, can we also for that. Nancy Udelson for everything you did. And Kelly Morrell, who we were stuck in traffic for quite some time last night. She brought me in. Thank you for everything you did. And again, it's just a great gathering of people. I love the Daughters Club. They should have a Daughters Club in every chat. So they don't have these all over. Is this the only one? It's really a great thing, a gathering. So it's an honor to be here today. And it's an honor to be able to share something that I am so passionate about. So I really thank you for bringing me here today. It's also been an honor to help my mother take care of my father. And I know that so many of you who are caregivers share that same feeling I have. Not that there are some days you wish you didn't have this job, not that there are some days that are horrible, but ultimately it's been an honor for me, and I think that many of you share that same feeling. It's been an extremely interesting journey, getting back home and becoming a caregiver. And I know that many of you who are daughters, and it tends to be daughters more than sons, share this journey with me. I recently came across this quote from Mother Teresa, and I do not know why I never found it while I was writing my book. And I wish I'd found it before, and you may all be familiar with it, but I wanted to read it. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And there's something about that just is very moving for me, because I think that in this world, I was talking with a lovely woman, Chris. Is it Chris? I'm sorry. Yes, we were talking earlier about who she has an amazing story to tell, as so many of you do here, about how families are sort of forgetting their responsibilities in some ways. And I think everybody in this room, if you're here, you are part of a family. You've taken a responsibility at some point. If you're not directly involved with Alzheimer's, you have somehow, though, what brought you here today means that you are a responsible part of a family, and you care about this community in some way. And it seems we've sort of lost that. So I love that quote from Mother Teresa, and I know that something about that quote spoke to me, and it means a lot to suddenly realize in what way we are intrinsically, part of our family, our nuclear family, and the larger family of the community. And that's what caregiving, I think, is all about. It seems sort of odd to say this now, but it took me several decades, I think, to realize that I belong to my parents and that they belong to me. And in some strange way, by embracing this fact over the past, it was 6 years I was home with my father. And I feel I belong to the world now because I did that caregiving thing, which no one who knew me ever thought I was going to do something like that. By doing that, I feel I belong to the world now in an entirely different way than I belonged to the world before, when I was just being a career gal. I feel so fortunate that I was able to come home as an adult daughter to share the role of caregiving with my mother, because it isn't often in one's life that you can truly follow your heart. And that's really, what I did. That's what my book's about. I have no regrets either. It is the best thing I've ever done. What I didn't know when I came home is that perhaps I needed my parents as much as they needed me. After college, I began my radio career at a small town in northern Michigan, and I just wanted to give you a little background about how weird my life was. It's still a weird life, but through a circuitous route, I wound up in Los Angeles. Started out in Michigan, and then I went to school in Michigan, and then ended up in Los Angeles. I became a reporter at the all-news station, if you've ever been to Los Angeles. It's called KFWB. And eventually I moved up to what's called the Morning Streets Beat, which means you're covering murders, fires, the homeless situation. There was a very controversial political scene at the time, culminating in the Rodney King beatings, which resulted in the Los Angeles riots in 1992. I remember so well driving my KFWB mobile unit, which is basically like a police cruiser with a radio station logo on it, all sorts of antennas and two-way radios and other equipment mounted on it so you can broadcast live from almost anywhere. And I'm driving this sort of porcupine-looking vehicle along Sunset Boulevard, and I'm going live on several radio stations explaining this Mad Max-like scene. The city was pretty much on fire at that point as I drove. I remember seeing the orange glow of the horizon of the city, the flames, the police radio squawking, the way the sounds of sirens and ambulances permeated the air. And it was very surreal. And I had this kind of out-of-body experience, like, how did I get here? And yet at the same time, I had this feeling I was meant to be in this spot. I was supposed to be here in this place to be the one to tell this story. And it was during the riots that I began reporting for ABC News. And that's how I got hired by ABC News. They decided to place me at KGO Radio, which was an ABC station in San Francisco. And some of the first stories I covered for KGO Radio, the ABC station, were the U.S. occupation of Haiti, the O.J. Simpson murder trial. There were several earthquakes. There were lots of wildfires. I even got to fly in an F-16 with the Blue Angels for a story I was covering. I did not barf. I was very proud. And that pilot was really handsome. That was cool. It was really amazing. There's stories I could tell you about that too, but I won't. And I was sent to London to cover the death of Princess Diana. That was an amazing, moving story. I'll never forget that. I broadcast live from Jerusalem for a week as I did a series of reports on the conflict in the Middle East. I covered the Olympics in Sydney, the hanging Chad fiasco in Florida in the year 2000. I hope there's not another one of those this election year. I have been in 3 coups d'etats, only one of them on purpose. The other one's really accidentally. And I also accidentally ended up in a hot tub with a serial killer while covering a triple murder in Yosemite. But that's another murder, another story and another murder for another time. That was a mistake I made. Just the other day, I was talking with some of my former colleagues, and I said, I'm going to Cleveland, to talk about this. And I said, sometimes I'll give a lecture and I'll just talk about caregiving. And a lot of my friends said, you should tell a little bit more about your life, before you do this. So this is sort of new that I'm telling a little bit more of what I left to do this. So I decided, and I said, what do you remember? And they said, don't you remember the time you drove through a roadblock to get to a story and the police were chasing after you with sirens? And I said, and I guess I wasn't supposed to drive through that roadblock, but I really wanted this story. And you know what is funny about this? Honestly, I don't remember that. It's kind of like what I did every day. So I guess I had tunnel vision when I was on a story. And they said I was a very aggressive reporter, and they said I was like a pit bull with a piece of meat, and I wouldn't let go when I was on a story. So being a radio reporter on the morning shift means you wake up at 2:30 or 3 a.m., you arrive at the station by 4 a.m. When you anchor the morning news, you wake up at 2 a.m. to arrive at the station by 3 a.m. By the way, some of you know this already, but I've just taken a job in Chicago after being home, taking care of my dad for so long, and I now get up at 2:30 in the morning, and it's a shock, and you never get used to it. But that's morning news. Sometimes I want to tell everyone, you're listening to the radio in the morning, all those people reporting to you, they're all delirious, and they don't get enough sleep. And they get up at 2:30 in the morning. Anyway, so your pager can go off. Sorry, I popped that. Your pager can go off at any time, and whenever there's breaking news. And, the pager always goes off at exactly the wrong moment. So I lived and breathed my job. It was all I cared about. My entire identity was wrapped up in my career. So wherever I went, I would say my name with the call letters after it. Marilyn Geist, KGO Radio. And one of my best friends, Michael Lynn Myers, the traffic reporter who flew above San Francisco every day in a Bell helicopter. I'm sure you guys have traffic reporters here like that, though they're getting less and less. They're not spending money on that these days in radio. But she finally pulled me aside at a party where I had just announced my name with the call letters after it. And I handed out my business card, of course, And she told me it was obnoxious. And she said, why can't you just be you? And when she said that, I think I realized I don't know how to be me. I don't know how to be me without my job. And let me take this moment to say thank God for good friends like Michael Lynn who have the guts to tell you the truth and tell you when your life is getting out of balance. I think we had a little bit of a fight after that, but like best friends do, we got over it right away. So as you can imagine, during this time, I didn't have much of a personal life. I left friends waiting for me in restaurants. People would come to visit me. I wouldn't be there, so I'd left my key with the neighbors so they could come in case I'd invited someone to come visit me and I was on breaking news. My friends started calling me Danger Girl. I wanted the big story. I wanted to be the first one to report breaking news. I wanted to win awards. I wanted to be number one. And yet at the same time that I was very competitive, I was always championing causes too, because I did feel that being on the radio and being in this position that you should use your talents to serve others. So I was involved in issues like the homeless, poor, minorities. As much as I was competitive, I also believed that a good reporter has the opportunity to work for the greater good, perhaps to change government policy for the better, change lives for the better. So I was dedicated to those causes, but again, using my career only as the way in to do these things, you know. And it didn't even occur to me then that I could use these desires, these talents I had to help my own family. I saw that I could help other people in the community. It never occurred to me to help my own family. And what I didn't know at the time is that I was also building a repertoire of skills that were actually perfect and very useful for helping to take care of my father. So about 2 years after I moved from Los Angeles to San Francisco to work at the ABC news station in the early 90s, that's when we all began realizing there was something with wrong with my father. And at first, we didn't know it was the plaque of Alzheimer's invading his brain. We just thought old age, forgetfulness, typical in a man. He was nearing 70 years of age. He was about 67 years old. And that is when I realized that families are better than the CIA at covering up things like Alzheimer's. It is a talent that families have. Oh, he's fine. Nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Totally in denial. And none of us wanted to realize that my wonderful dad that we adored, president of a company, so together, you know, did so many things, singer, doing all these amazing things in his life. We did not want to realize there was something wrong. And then finally, the shocking diagnosis. And then we began down that long, slow road, what some call the long goodbye. But so at this same time that this is happening, we're realizing all these things are going wrong with my mom and my dad. My own life is on a trajectory upward. So I was getting all these awards. My life was going great. My mom and dad's lives, you know, totally opposite. So I really began to weigh the two. And I began to consider, it just came to me, you know what? Everything in my life is going so well. Everything's going so badly for my mom. I'd had so many things. I'd traveled all over the world. I even won this award that I always wanted, Reporter of the Year from the Associated Press. Like, that was like the biggie. And I just thought, you know, I'd done that thing. I did that thing. How weird would it be if I came home? And I found another quote that meant a lot to me at that time. The feminist scholar Elaine Showalter penned these words, "Why not do everything you can?" And when I first read that quote, I thought this could only apply to one's career. You got to go win, you got to achieve, you got to win awards, do everything you can. Slowly, I began to realize that that statement could apply to other decisions in one's life, more personal decisions. So I thought I'd read this section from the second chapter of the book, and this was one day when suddenly I knew what I was going to do. One Sunday afternoon, when I was visiting my parents for the weekend, a few hours before my flight back to New York. So at this time, by the way, I'd gone from KGO radio in San Francisco to WCBS in New York. A few hours before my flight back to New York, I said, "Dad, let's go for a walk." It was autumn, and brilliantly colored leaves lined the country road. I told him to put on his coat and meet me outside. I didn't realize until we got out to the road that he had put on my mother's powder blue jacket instead of his own. The sleeves were much too short. He looked like a child who had suddenly grown too big for his clothes. We were on the road, walking together, when he said once again, "Why do you have to leave? Why can't you stay here with us?" Because the coat was much too small to zip up over his large body, he ran his hands up and down the useless zipper clasp in the nervous tick way he's developed since he got Alzheimer's. Then he looked down at the powder blue jacket, only partially covering his stomach, the sleeves coming only halfway down his arms, and he looked embarrassed as he said, "I have your mother's coat on, don't I?" I started to cry, the kind of crying that just won't stop. I knew then that I wanted to come home to help my mother make sure Dad didn't accidentally wear someone else's clothes when he walked out on the road. I wanted to come home to help make sure his hair was combed properly. I wanted to help Mom make sure that the doctors and nurses who treated him were giving him the care he needed. I wanted to help my mother make sure he took the right combination of pills each morning and evening. I wanted to come home to have the time to say goodbye. So eventually, despite the advice of many people, some who thought I was going through a major midlife crisis, losing my mind, or going through a terrible rush of hormones, after 2 decades of reporting and anchoring at KFWB Los Angeles, KGO Radio in San Francisco, and then anchoring at WCBS in New York, I declined a lucrative contract offer. I finally decided to come home for an extended period of time, and I just said, I'm doing it. I had no plan in mind. I just said, I'm coming home to take care of my father. And I was so lucky because my program director and news director, though disappointed, they really did seem to understand. I even think like 10 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. But things have changed so much, and people are so aware of the crisis that we are in. In fact, they'd just begun a section in the CBS website called The Sandwich Generation about baby boomers who are caring for their parents. So when I left, instead of being angry with me for leaving, they asked if I'd be willing to contribute to this website. Would I be willing to write about my experiences for the CBS website? And at first I said, no way. I do not want to share this. I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm like jumping off a cliff. It's going to be a very personal thing. And besides, I didn't have a husband, kids, house. I said I'm kind of like an open-faced sandwich, not really a normal sandwich generation. But, and it's true. And by the way, I've talked to a lot of people here who are taking care of like kids and houses and families and and jobs. I just talked to a woman that has a full-time job while she's taking care. I do not know how you do it, because me jumping off and just going to take care of my dad, I don't even know how people do jobs at the same time as they take care of somebody. I really commend, everybody in this room for all the caregiving they do, and if you have a job too, frankly, I don't know how you do it. So I said, the very first night, though, I got home, I thought, I got to write about this. So since I've been a reporter my whole life and a writer, I felt kind of weird because my dad's den is downstairs, and I was sleeping in my little room, that still had like stuffed animals in it, this tiny little bed where I'd been kid, my dolls are there, It's like as if I'd never had this career, I'd never left home. Why is it that a lot of moms keep their homes like a museum to when you were a child? They don't want to admit that you've grown up, that's what I think. But so I'd sneak downstairs, and I'd get up at exactly 2:30 or 3 in the morning when I normally would be getting up to report, and I have an alarm clock in my head, and I would just go downstairs, and I felt like this interloper because I was going into my dad's den, and there was his desk and his pens, all things he could no longer use, And I thought, well, I'm going to use that place to write my dad's story, and I just started writing and reporting, almost being like a reporter on my personal situation, a reporter reporting on myself, and I just started writing, and I thought, I could put this into that website, but I was a little scared as I did it. I remember so well. It was therapy, though, for me in the middle of the night, and I recommend to all of you that are caregivers to write down what you're going through, to journal. Even if no one ever sees it, it's really good for you to write down, to speak it out loud. If you can talk with your friends and tell them really what you're going through, all the gory details. If you have someone you can tell you're going through this with, it will help in so many ways. And if you don't have that, if you're more isolated, alone, or you don't feel comfortable doing that, to write it down, even in a place where no one else will ever see it, to speak your truth and to put it out there is so good for you. So I would amble downstairs in the middle of the night, I would write, and I'd watch the way my father maneuvered through his day, the way he used language, his incredible social skills, which carried him through dinners and parties and performances with his singing group, despite his Alzheimer's, and the way my mother enabled my father to move about the world with such grace, quietly moving in front of him and behind him and making sure he always looked nice, making sure his pride was intact, and making him feel so loved despite his Alzheimer's. So I wanted to record this all because also I was so amazed at it because I hadn't seen that kind of love very much, in my life and among my friends. These are behaviors, and relationships that I hadn't really experienced in my mean newsrooms, or among my friends, in LA or San Francisco or New York. I really hadn't seen that kind of love very much. So it was very amazing to me, and I wanted to document it. After a long day of caregiving, I would write and write, and I'm sure that I also, wrote to immortalize my father. I had no idea at that time that what I was writing would become a book. But anyway, I had these pieces. I put these up on the website, and literally hundreds of emails poured in. And it's funny, I thought I was really cool. I thought I'd cover these big stories. Oh, O.J. Simpson, I went to Haiti. You know what? Nobody cared about that stuff. They cared about this. I mean, hundreds of people, so many people contacted me about the fact that I left my job to take care of my dad, that it crashed my computer. I mean, that says so much, I think, about our need to reach out to people. And yeah, we can brag about the things we've accomplished in our lives, but you know, a lot of people really wished they were, this is the funny thing, I thought I'd hear from people that had done what I did. I heard from a lot of people that wished they could have done what I did. And I think that's fascinating too. Yeah, yeah. And believe me, not everybody can do it, but it really surprised me. So that says something wonderful about the human spirit and about the human race in general, because so many people said, I wish I could have taken care of my parents like that, and they commended me. Anyway, so I started being asked to speak about caregiving, even though it was very new to me, and was just learning. I spoke at a conference at Sarah Lawrence College. Jane Gross, a writer for the New York Times, was in attendance. And after I read a piece about coming home to help my mother take care of my father, she approached me and said, I think there are a lot more daughters like you out there. And in fact, she was right. And I told her how, when I came home, I learned I was one of more than 50 million caregivers across the U.S. About 11 million of us are taking care of someone with Alzheimer's disease or some form of dementia. And the majority of us, as most of you in this room probably suspect, are women. And I told her about this response. Well, she flew to Michigan, brought a photographer, and she did some research on what she called the daughter track, and it was on the front page of the New York Times in 2005. And that is what began the process of writing this book. And it was the responses from that article in the New York Times about me coming home to take care of my dad was one of the most responded to stories they'd had, like, of that year. I mean, it's really fascinating what's going on in the world. Now, one of the reasons I was the right kid to come home, I'd been a jazz singer for many years while I was being a reporter. And my father, even though he'd been president of a company in Detroit, as much as he loved that job, as much as he loved us, I think actually if you had this scale of music, family, job, I kind of think music might be the top. And his greatest love was singing, and singing jazz. So I knew all his songs, and when I came home, that is how my father and I communicated. And I was pretty sure that my father's ability to sing all the words to songs he had sung, even though he didn't know the words for most objects, was pretty rare. And so one of the first things I did when I came home was to develop my own brand of music therapy in order for me to communicate with my father. So this is from a chapter that I titled Whistling in the Dark. You know all the cliches. Music lifts you up. Music fills your heart. Music makes the world go round. But for my father, in the late stages of Alzheimer's, it's more than that. Music makes him come alive. Sometimes, especially when we're having a bad day, during which my dad can't understand words or identify objects, when he seems to be moving slowly as if his batteries have run out, I lead him to a large mirror. I did this a lot before he sang with his a cappella singing group at his 80th birthday party. We both stand directly in front of the mirror so we can watch our faces as we sing. And then I start singing a song he used to perform on a regular basis, preferably one in which he had a solo. Shoe Be Doin', which is kind of an odd song by Johnny Mercer. That's one he loved, in which he had a solo. It was one of his most beloved solos with the 12-man a cappella singing group he performed with for 40 years. So when I begin singing the song with him, often less than one word or bar into it, he chimes right in with his part and all the lyrics. At first, though, he stands in a slouched position with his head bent down, not looking at himself in the mirror. After the first few verses, pointing to the mirror, I say, "Look, Dad," and sometimes I actually reach over and gently, tip his head up and make him look in the mirror. He doesn't want to at first. It was really funny. He would just sort of be bent over. And, sorry, I'm having trouble here with this. And I'd actually tilt his body and head a bit, so he would actually turn toward the mirror and stand the way he would during a performance. At my urging, he starts watching himself sing as he looks at his reflection, and that is when something remarkable happens. He stands up straighter, as if he were on stage. I can see his face change, as if some sort of lucidity and understanding has floated into the room, introduced by music. As he sings and looks into the mirror, he seems to remember the man he once was. The man who couldn't wait to take the stage to sing with the Grunions or in a musical. The man who stood up tall and straight with arms outstretched, looking up at the ceiling as he hit a high note. The man who ran a company and sat behind a big wooden desk, who gave speeches and took initiative and took control. As I watch the two of us singing together in the mirror, it's almost eerie, as though someone else has taken over his body. Essentially, this is kind of what occurs. Someone without Alzheimer's, the old Woody, appears. Muscle memory is what people call it. The music seems to cue him, wake him up, take him back to the time before the Alzheimer's plaque set in, to the time when he remembered everything. Then he starts moving like he used to move, smiling like he used to smile. He even starts making facial expressions the way he used to make them when he sang with the Grunions, even if the meaning of the words he is singing may now elude him. Dad's newfound presence lasts the duration of the song. He hits the final note triumphantly into the mirror. Then the minute the song is over, he whistles nervously and starts curling in on himself again, slouching over. It's almost as if he deflates, as if the song never happened. One day when we finished singing, I could tell he didn't really remember what he had just done. He looked a bit stunned and unsure of what had occurred, and then he looked in the mirror with his watery blue eyes and said, "Who is that guy?" Why can't the impact music has on him be inserted into the rest of his brain cells and body? Why can't the singing Woody stay with him throughout the rest of the day? The philosopher Nietzsche said, "We listen to music with our muscles." Clearly, these muscles continue to work in my father, even as Alzheimer's takes everything else away. So this is where things get a little weird. And, I didn't want to go Oprah on you, but there's no getting around it. I got to go Oprah on you because I believe, as she does, that there is a path that you are meant to find. And once again, I had a kind of out-of-body experience. I had that tingly feeling again, the same feeling I had when I was covering the riots in LA. And when I started writing the book, I knew this is the story that I was meant to tell. I was meant to tell my father's story. I was meant to speak for him because he could no longer use his words to tell the story. I was meant to sing his songs and help his message about music get out into the world. I really felt this was the place I was supposed to be. And I've often felt throughout this process that my father reached through his Alzheimer's to give me this gift of this book so that the message about music and creative caregiving can get out to the world. I really feel like he's with me, especially when I do things like this. And here's more proof of that. So here I am, starting to write this book and taking care of my dad. So several months into writing the book, I woke up one morning and I said, I think it's time to email Oliver Sacks. He's a noted neurologist. He doesn't know me from Adam. I don't even know why I was so convinced I should try to contact him. I had no idea where he lived. I'd read many of his books. I admired him greatly. I thought he lived in England. Seriously, I just thought, now it's time to get a hold of him. You might know of him because he wrote the book Awakenings, which was made into a movie with Robert De Niro, Robin Williams. He'd also written several other well-known books, most of them involving brain disease, like The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. So I wrote to him about this incredible musical proclivity I saw in my father and how I was using it in my caregiving. And did he know anything about this? I saw every day the miraculous effects of music on my father and also other people with Alzheimer's that were in the community that I was beginning to do some work with. And he wrote back immediately via email to tell me he was researching the effects of music and Alzheimer's at that moment when I wrote to him. And he said, "Can I come to Michigan, or could you come to New York?" And it turned out we were going to visit my aunt and uncle in New York in 2 weeks. So that's kind of weird too. We visited him at his office in Greenwich Village. Now, I don't recommend taking someone who has Alzheimer's for 13 years on the subway. My father got stuck in the turnstile. We almost lost him on the number 3 train. It was an adventure. I want you to know it all turned out okay. We took a taxi back. But, and so Dr. Sacks, it was really wonderful to watch Dr. Sacks sort of assessing my father's Alzheimer's and where Dad was at that point. And they loved each other, like, immediately. It was really cool. And what he decided to, he was really struck by my father and my father's singing. And so he ended up writing this book called Musicophilia, about music and Alzheimer's and the brain. And he has a chapter about my father, and I just wanted to read a little bit of it. Remembering anew that he can sing is profoundly reassuring to Woody, as the exercise of any skill or competence can be for someone with Alzheimer's. And it can stimulate his feelings, his imagination, his sense of humor and creativity, his sense of identity as nothing else can. It can enliven him, calm him, focus, and engage him. It can give him back himself and not least, it can charm others, arouse their amazement and admiration, reactions more and more necessary to someone who, in his lucid moments, is painfully aware of his tragic disease, and he says he feels broken inside. You know, I wrote about that in parts of the book. When I came home, Dad would get up, and he'd almost be teary-eyed some mornings, and I'd say, "What's wrong, Dad?" And he said, "I'm broken inside." Like he knew. I mean, that's what's so bizarre. I could talk forever about that, but I can't go on a tangent about that now. But it was so weird how aware he was of his disease and that he was broken inside. And he would often say, "I'm tangled, and we have to find the untanglers." Anyway, reading on here. Perhaps, this again is Oliver Sacks. Perhaps Woody, though he could not have put it into words, knows that this is the case for him, for in the last year or so he has taken to whistling. He whistled Somewhere Over the Rainbow softly to himself for the entire afternoon we spent together. Whenever he was not actively singing or otherwise engaged, Mary Ellen and Rosemary is my mother's name, Mary Ellen and Rosemary told me he now whistles all the while, not only through his waking hours. He sometimes whistles and sometimes sings in his sleep. So at least in this sense, Woody is companioned by music, calls on it around the clock. And again, that's by Oliver Sacks from his book called Musicophilia. It was lovely to see them together. It was like they got it about each other. And Dr. Sacks ended up writing the foreword to my book. He's remained close with my family ever since that day. He really helped light the way for a lot of the work I've been doing, as my father has lighted the way as well. So eventually, I used music in almost every aspect of my caregiving with my father. In the morning, I woke him up with, when I came home, I remember my mother saying, "He's so depressed in the morning." And sometimes he would wake up and say, "I don't know where I am." And he would say, and she said, "I'm pretty sure he might not know who I am at first either." And he looks around the room, and I said, "What can I do to change that?" Well, I know that music made him feel so alive, and so I just would creep in the morning, and I put Frank Sinatra's Wee Small Hours of the Morning. And I think he not only loved Frank Sinatra, I think he thought they were like good friends. And so, so I'd put that on, or I'd start singing. So, in the wee small hours of the morning, when the whole wide world is fast asleep. I'd just sing that to him, and he's just like, oh, and he'd smile. And then, because I was singing to him, and he knew that song, he knew me then too. He knew that there was a friend in the room, and everything was cool. Like it started out the day better. So then I'd get him up, and it'd be time for showering. Okay, showering sucks. She knows. She knows. She knows. Horrible. So I was like, what can I do? Anyway, we had a CD player. We got to talk after this, okay? We're going to talk after this. Because that was the worst. The worst. Somebody's got to tell us more. I've heard that because they're so sensitive later and the nerve endings are so different, that the feel of water on their skin freaks them out. Like, all I know is there's something we don't know about Alzheimer's and showering, and I still can't believe somebody can't create something, a soft, beautiful way to ease someone into a bathtub. It should not be traumatic. I know many people have come up with all different things. Sponge baths, I don't know, but what I did is I sang, "Night and day, you are the one, only you beneath the moon and under the sun." And he'd just look at me, and then he would just chime in, and he'd smile, and I'd be like scrubbing him while I'm singing. Whether near to, I wear my bathing suit sometimes so I could get in the shower with him, and we'd be singing in there. Okay, thank God no one was filming this, okay? I mean, just let's admit it right now. To become a caregiver, you become insane. You're sort of insane. You have to be insane. And one thing is okay, I'm supposed to say this later, but I'm saying it now. You got to throw normal out the window. Who cares? So what? The neighbors come over. I'm singing Cole Porter tunes in my bathing suit in the shower with my father. So what? I'm taking care of my dad. I know everyone thought it was weird, but you know what? It worked. By the way, if you were having trouble with showering, recently in Denver, I did this conference. I was talking about the singing thing, and this woman said, "Do you know about languages and stuff?" I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Well, she works on a floor with all Alzheimer's people, all having difficulty with showers." She says, "Well, what I do is sometimes I speak British. I say, 'Hello, Mr. Geist. How are you?'" And then he's looking at trying to figure out why is she speaking that way, and while he's trying to figure out, and she goes, "I like British. I do a Russian accent too," and just to freak them out and have them concentrating on her. And then she goes, I can scrub them down while they're looking at my face and trying to figure out what language I'm speaking. Anyway, These are creative things you can do as long as you don't care that the rest of the world thinks you're crazy. Anyway, so then, sundowning, you guys all know, in the afternoon when people get agitated and weird. He loved Diana Krall, and that was another thing. Just like I said, he thought he knew Frank Sinatra. I think he thought he might have had an affair with Diana Krall. He's like, I love Diana Krall. Anyway, so I would sing, I get along without you very well, of course I do, except when soft rains fall. And he would just look at me, and he'd just like, that's cool. And so he was all agitated, and he would like totally calm down. And so anyway, we had a CD player in every room, including the bathroom, and we would just play music for different things. And when you're having a really bad day, and I want you to know that I realize I'm in Ohio, however, singing, hail to the victors, valiant hail to the conquering heroes, his alma mater, University of Michigan, hail to the victors. I'm sorry if I offended anyone in this room. He loved that, and he would just chime right in with that. And again, he's knowing that he knows the words, and he knows that you're acknowledging that he remembers that, and it brings all this pride back in, to him. And so always singing, or whatever somebody can do. And again, I'm not saying exclusively music, but you tap into this one thing that brings pride and security and something back that brings back some of themselves. And I think music has some incredible magical quality that we still don't know enough about. But I think many other things can be a way that you can tap into someone to bring pride, a sense of themselves back. And sometimes it can stay with them for quite some time. Toward the end, I almost felt like I'd created a monster. I know that sounds weird, but he had to have music on at all times. And when he was toward the end of his life, we had a CD player going, the music would stop, and he'd slump over. Almost like a battery in a, and we had to go, start the music again. Like my mother's like, oh my God, there's no music. And I would actually use it I needed to take him to the doctor. So the music's playing in the house. And I would keep the music blaring. I'd run out to my Jeep. I'd pull the Jeep up to the house. I'd play the music really loud. Then I'd go inside. I'd turn off the music. He's like freaking out. I'm like, the music's out there, Dad. And like a Pied Piper, he'd follow the music and go get in my Jeep. And that's how I got into the doctor. Anyway, so music is one way to communicate with a person with Alzheimer's. But there are other ways, too. And I wanted to read this little piece about language because it's related to the music thing as well. Anyway. Sometimes the words Dad uses are creative new explanations of objects or ideas. Sometimes, though, words are complete reversals of what they once were. Lately, he points to an object, and the word for it simply isn't there. It's gone. From what I've heard from other caregivers and from the books I've read about Alzheimer's, the use of language is one of the first indications that Alzheimer's is setting in. Sometimes the words are flipped around. Sometimes the person living with Alzheimer's can't find the word. And sometimes there are wonderful new ways the person living with Alzheimer's refers to an object. My father's been calling the TV the radio for several years now. No one who spends time with him corrects him anymore. We simply know what he's referring to when he wants to watch television. He says, I want to watch the radio. And we get out the remote when he begins obsessively wanting the radio. Maybe because my career has been in radio for so many years, I secretly like it that he thinks the TV is the radio. Once he called me in a very upset tone from his bedroom. I forgot to say this too. When I came home, he did not remember my name. He just knew that I was daughter. So when he needed me, he'd go, daughter, daughter, where are you? I will never forget this one moment, which I think is illustrative. We're driving in the car. We'd been having this great time. I'm like, I've come home to help my dad. I know he knows who I am. You have that savior thing going on. Everything's great. I'm going to change his life, improve his life. I'm going to cure his Alzheimer's. Sorry. That's what we all think. We all think when we come home we're going to save the day. And, of course, you find out that you can't. So we're driving in the car. I'm like, I'm making him feel so much better. It's so great. He absolutely knows who I am. And he goes, it's so good that you came home. Now, are you the oldest one? And it's that weird moment, and if you've taken care of someone with Alzheimer's, I'll never forget that. And I'm like, no. And of course, I'm trying not to cry, because I'm like, he doesn't know which one I am. He knows I'm his daughter, though. That's a good thing. So I'm like, okay, I could sit here and sob, or I could turn this around. And I said, you know what, Dad? No, I'm not the oldest one. That's Allison. I'm the middle one, and I'm Mary Ellen. And then I went ahead and I told him the story of my life. And it was such an amazing moment. And I remember that always because from that time, everything changed. I took every time he didn't know who I was or he didn't remember what he did with his life, I would tell him. So I said, I went to Kalamazoo College. Really? I said, yeah, you sent me to college. He said, did I? That was great of me. And he was so happy. And I'd tell him about my life. And I thought that's such a good lesson because one of the things I do as I go around to different nursing homes and stuff, you see a couple together and they're just sitting there and they're not talking and nothing's happening. And of course, the tragic and heartbreak of that. I am not at all taking away from the fact that that may be the place they're in. But that moment can be turned around instead of staring at Wheel of Fortune. Okay, why do they think that people with Alzheimer's want to see Wheel of Fortune? Last time I went to see my dad, one of the last times I went to see my dad, there was like a Western on and they were like bloody things and somebody like was blowing someone's head, brains out with a gun. What the heck? Anyway, the TV thing, that's a whole other discussion for another time. But anyway, so I just I see people sitting and not being able to talk and you can turn to them and tell them the story of your life and it's a wonderful thing if they can hear. Now again, everybody has different situations, different physical things. But I made a book, of my dad's life, and we would go through the book, and I'd say, you were president. He goes, really? I was president of that company? And I tell him, after my book came out, I still remember, I'm like, Dad, I wrote this because you did. And I'm like, I wrote this book, and it's about you, really. Next day, Dad, I wrote this book. Really? Every single day. I'd show him this book, but he was so happy. And so even if they can't remember, it is a wonderful thing if you can tell them the story of their life or your life. I mean, I tried to never give up on that. I'm not saying it's not repetitive, obnoxious, and you get sick of it sometimes, but it was really an interesting thing. Anyway, so when I came home, he would call, daughter, where are you? In my house. And so then this one day, I'm going to go back to this. Once he called me in a very upset tone from his bedroom. Daughter, can you help me with this? He was in front of the TV with the remote in his hands. Look at the radio, he said in a shocked tone. It was a horrible TV picture, hardly decipherable, snowy black and white dots instead of the show he wanted to watch. Can you fix this, he asked. It's all trinkly. And I thought, it is trinkly. That's a really good word for what happens when the picture on your TV screen gets messed up. When you spend time with a person living with Alzheimer's, you learn that certain key words, not only are they creative in creating another word for something, you learn that certain key words mean something else. For instance, Dad's wallet and his keys are of paramount importance to him. He was a car guy. Wallet, important too, for power, the man, money. So as Alzheimer's takes hold of his brain, those words have become interchangeable. And sometimes the word car gets in the mix too. So we knew wallet, keys, car. And all of them were mixed together and could be used for the same thing. So my family has a theory that all those things mean independence and power and success, and that's why they're lumped in the same category in my father's brain. The people who spend the most time with my father simply realize this, and there's no need to correct him. When he's anxious and looking around for something, we just show him where all those things are. Then he's calm and relieved. His anxiety dissipates. The other day, my father and I were in my car. He performed what has become a daily ritual of patting his breast pocket, then his pants pocket. This is what he does when he searches for his wallet every day. Where's the car? He said. I answered, it's in your pocket, Dad. He patted his pants pocket, feeling the outline of his leather wallet, and he nodded and said, yes, there it is. I realized then that I was adopting his vernacular. I was understanding and using his language. I was using his words instead of trying to teach him mine. I've come to believe that's the way it should be. In some cases, there's no need to correct it. In many cases, that is, there's no need to correct the person at all. So for now, for today, the car is in his pocket, and that's fine with both of us. So that passage speaks to what I feel so strongly about, that you must go into the world of the person with Alzheimer's and not insist that the person with Alzheimer's comes into your world. And I want to go back to throwing normal out the window again, because, okay, meal times when I came home, it was horrible. He'd look at a plate, it would be all like, I can't eat that. I can't possibly eat that. I'd give him this nice food I worked all day to fix. It's like, I don't want that. And I'm like, Dad, come on, you got to eat. You have to eat. Horrible fights. Then I found Joanne Koenig-Kost's book, Learning to Speak Alzheimer's. I love that book. I highly recommend it. Just happened to find it at the right time. And she talked about how their eyesight is changing. You probably all know this already, but a giant plate filled with a bunch of food is chaos, confusion, often to someone with Alzheimer's. She said, finger food, you know. And why is it? Like, I'll go out and I'll see a couple and they'll order steak, you know. Well, they can't often use a knife and a fork. It's because you want so much that person to be the person they used to be. So you want them to eat the same food they eat with you and do the same things. I tried to change that when I came home because we had so many embarrassing moments in restaurants. But of course, we wanted to go to restaurants so it would appear that our lives were, again, CIA, denial, cover-up. We wanted to appear that everything was fine. And when she said that, I'm like, oh my God, that's right. We could just get little things of carrots and broccoli. And I really don't like corporate, like fast food places, but I now love McDonald's. Chicken McNuggets, so good. Like just, you can get that for the plate and they can eat with their fingers and it's fine. Like I think it's so many of us, we don't want to change that. We don't want to make it so that our loved one is eating finger food. Anyway, so we changed meal times, finger food, love it. We sang all the time. We'd go to Ace Hardware and sing for the person at the cash register. People I know thought we were insane. And there was one thing I thought too, besides music. It was so awful when we had to take the keys away. I know you all know this if you've been a caregiver. And my dad was so into cars, and he was a car guy, president of a corporation. And I thought, how could I bring back that feeling he had when he was driving a car? So again, went to a big corporate, big box store, hadn't planned on that. Go to Walmart, I think it was. I see these motorized shopping carts. I'm like, that's it. And so Dad gets in the motorized shopping cart, and he was like right away so good at it. So Dad and I would often ride those motorized cars, and he's like waving at kids. Down the aisles. We had it was hilarious. And I would ride next to him. And I know that the people at Walmart were like, oh my God, that insane middle-aged Marilyn Geist and her crazy father are coming here again to ride our motorized shopping carts. But it was great. And he only crashed it once, just a teensy bit into the edge of something. Anyway, I know that's kind of dangerous sounding, but to me, I mean, if you can do anything like that, I really wish they could have Dodgem cars for people in nursing homes, in a padded room. I don't know. There's got to be something there that we could do. Anyway, again, throwing normal out the window. So I suppose I'd have always wanted to lead a life with no regrets. I'd been contemplating coming home, and despite the risks, I did it. And one of the reasons I did this is because of what was happening to my mother. And when I did some research for my book, I discovered one study that showed 62% of caregivers of people with Alzheimer's die before the people they're taking care of die. And now that is a small study, but it still is a warning to everybody. And everybody in this room is a caregiver. You have to take care of yourself. And one of the things I did when I came home, Mom, you are getting away. She had Stockholm syndrome. I always told him Mom, you got to leave. She goes, I can't. Your father's here suffering at home. I'm like, you got to go. Manicure, pedicure, massage, get out, get away. You have to have friends. You have to go away. I know if money's a factor, you can even get from the county, we'll have a respite worker come, sometimes for $5 or free, 1 to 3 hours a week. My contention is, I think a lot of people know they could get somebody free in the home. They could do it, and they don't want to. They don't want to leave the side. It's like you're addicted to your role as a caregiver. You're afraid to leave. You feel you have to stay there, and you feel too guilty if you go have fun leaving the person you love at home to suffer. But I say, if you can get away 3 to 4 hours every day, it will save your life. Get away if you can. Take care of yourself. You got to get away. We once find this. I said to my mom, we have to get somebody in the house. We brought somebody into the house the first time ever. Mom was so nervous. She doesn't like having a stranger in the house anyway. And I go, Mom, this is the caregiver that's going to come help. Isn't it great? And Mom sat down on the couch. Caregiver here, my dad here. I'm like, Mom, you're supposed to leave. She sat on the couch with the caregiver. Anyway, I made her leave and get out of the house. And I'm going to say out to all of you who are caregivers, you can get sometimes free respite. You got to take care of yourself. Am I going way over time, you guys? Are we okay? Can I just go? Good. Because in my work, they give me 30 seconds to do a story. Or sometimes 60 seconds. Sometimes I get 2 minutes. I'm so excited when I get to go more than 30 seconds to tell a story. You haven't actually get the hook, okay? But I think something happens to all of us along the way in our lives when we have achieved a modicum of success and maybe even gotten married, had children, bought a house. Okay, I skipped some of those parts. We ask, how can I give back? In what way can I help others? Give to a good cause? And I say, why can't one of those choices be helping our parents or loved ones, And now I have to say, the choice I made, not every adult child should come home, okay? Not everybody should. Like, I have one friend of mine, she's really mad at me. She's like, now that you came home, my mom wants me to come home and live with them. You've ruined my life. And her mom's like mad at her that she has a career and a life in Chicago. I'm like, no. Not everyone should leave, okay? It was all right and good for me to do. And I really, in doing so, I found a new career. And I had no idea that's what I was doing at the time. And the truth is, something had happened for me. My former career wasn't doing it for me so much anymore. My values were changing. I saw some of the people around me who had achieved success. I didn't like what I saw. And as I moved up the ranks, I didn't like the person I was becoming either. And can we all here today just say that even if you become president of a company, make millions of dollars, even if you win a Pulitzer or a Grammy or a Nobel Peace Prize or a Fulbright or an Oscar or an Emmy, can you all just promise me that you'll be kind and not forget that we, as Mother Teresa said, we all belong to each other? Because in the book, I talk about how, I found this whole other part of myself. It expanded my heart to come home and take care of my dad. And it's like the best thing I've ever done. And on the topic of not everyone should come home to help their parents, there's something else I'd like to point out. I hadn't been married. I had been married, didn't go so well. I didn't have a pet or a plant. I rented an apartment. I didn't have the things to give up. So many of you have given up so much more than I did. And I want to commend all of you. And it's really interesting. Every day, more and more people are considering doing what I did. More and more people are doing it. But the economy is causing another kind of caregiver, a caregiver that doesn't want to be there. I chose it. But a lot of people, they've lost their jobs. They come home and they've inadvertently become a caregiver. And we need to have more support and help for people that have become caregivers, either by choice or because they've come home because they lost a job or they can't afford to send their parents to nursing homes. You've probably all heard about the new Alzheimer's report that just came out. I did a story on it, actually, just a couple days ago. The cost of caregiving, cost of Alzheimer's to the U.S. in 2012, $200 billion. So we look at that number, though, and we look at, what all of you have given up. I mean, there was no financial help for me to come home, and yet I was doing the work that caregivers would be paid really well to do. And it's really interesting. I feel sometimes that the government just doesn't realize how much so many people are giving up their jobs, their lives, spending their own money to take care of their loved ones, and they're actually helping the government by doing that, because if they were in an institution, that's when the government does end up having to kick in and help. And I'm hoping that in the future there will be a way to help caregivers at home and monies and more support coming to people in their homes. Now, the numbers are going to grow by leaps and bounds in the coming years. The other thing in that report that was shocking, every 68 seconds, someone develops Alzheimer's disease in the United States. To me, that is so shocking to me. 5.5 million people have this disease in the U.S. It is the 6th leading cause of death. The amount of people with Alzheimer's is expected to more than double by the year 2015. And so there's not only a crisis with people getting Alzheimer's, there is a caregiving crisis right now. As former First Lady Rosalind Carter said at hearings on this issue in Washington, D.C., there are 4 types of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And there's something I wanted to do, which I hope won't make any of you uncomfortable. But one thing I know is that as a caregiver, often the person you're taking care of doesn't say thank you, or they can't say thank you. So could everybody who's a caregiver or has been a caregiver in this room, could you stand up right now, and could we have a round of applause for all of you who could be deemed caregivers in whatever way, whatever way. And I want to say thank you, because I know so many of you have given up so much to do what you've done. And I think all of you would agree, though all of us have suffered in many ways, either financially, emotionally. I know there's been a toll, but I really believe that all of us who've chosen to be caregivers have augmented our life, given new meaning to our lives by doing something like this. And I was thinking the other day that I honor every moment I spent as a working journalist, but I honor equally every moment I spent helping my mother take care of my father. And as I wrote in the book, now for the first time in many years, I don't identify myself by my career. My values and priorities and how I think about the world have changed immensely. I define myself and my life in a whole new way. These days, it is the measure of the heart that matters most to me. I can only hope that my heart will be as large as my father's is when I begin to leave this world. So I wanted to tell you all that since the book came out, so much has happened. Some of you may have seen my father featured in the HBO documentary, The Alzheimer's Project, which was executive produced by Maria Shriver. The section my father is in that documentary is called The Memory Tapes. It's called Woody's Song, and it shows him singing in one of the last performances on stage with his a cappella group. The series had a huge impact. It helped to get the word out about the healing power of music. One of the really cool things that's come out of this is that groups of a cappella singers are now organizing to go into nursing homes, assisted living, and residential facilities across the U.S., and they're calling this movement Woody's Voices. I love that. Sorry. It's good. Sorry. So, I can do this. Sorry. There had to be some tears, you guys. I'll get over it really quickly. The book has been optioned by a man named Lou Adler. You may have heard of him. He's a producer and a director. To make it into a feature film. And actually, 2 months ago, Kevin Kline called him and said, I found this book, and I am Woody. I want to play Woody. Now, I got to say, most option books, 91% of them, they're never made into a movie. But I think it'd be so cool, and I think he would be great, and I think the message about music and caregiving and creative caregiving would get out to the world even more. But it is already going out there because of my dad. I really feel like my dad has helped this happen, you know? Anyway, finally, the day my father died on March 17th, 2 years ago, my family started the Woody Geist Memorial Fund to create music programs for people living with Alzheimer's through the Alzheimer's Association. So I'm hoping someday music and music therapists will be present in every nursing home and Alzheimer's facility across the U.S. And there'll be a way to bring music and music therapy and creative one-on-one caregiving into every home where someone is living with Alzheimer's. That is my dream. I wish that could happen. It might be a pipe dream, but I'm going to keep working on it. So, the poet Adrienne Rich wrote these words, I'm thinking how we can use what we have to invent what we need. So in the coming years, as the number of people with Alzheimer's and the number of caregivers grows, we're going to have to address this healthcare crisis with creativity and resourcefulness as we look to the future. We're all going to have to use what we have to invent what we need. My father remained an optimist to the very end, and we were all with him. We played his favorite songs. We held him. There was music and love all around. And one of the last sentences my father said before he died was, aren't we lucky? Quite amazing. And that's how I feel today, because I know my father's life has made a difference in many people's lives, and I know the decision to make a radical change in my career path, which led to the writing of this book, has made a difference too. And I know that all of you who are caregivers and who will be caregivers, because we're all going to be, you will make a difference too. So thank you all, and thank you to the Daughters Club, and thank you to the Alzheimer's Association for bringing me here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. I'm sorry I blabbed too much. Questions?